good morning. Welcome to our March edition of SEND Searchlights, where we address your burning SEND assessment questions and share knowledge with and from colleagues in different parts of the world. So it's lovely to have so many new faces join us, as well as welcoming back a number of you from last time. So as former leaders for SEND provision, Emma and I will draw upon our wisdom, experience and learning to guide you with a meaningful use of data, whether that's part of an effective and efficient process of identification or to inform the wider strategic SEND picture. So just before we do get going, a little bit of housekeeping. Please do stay on mute. If you do need any clarification on today's questions, please put your questions in the chat box. We're not monitoring the Q&A box today. If you have any new questions for future webinars, please do complete the registration form, which we either sent to you after the webinar with the recording of this one. So thank you so much for all of your questions. Once again, we've had an overwhelming response, but please do keep them coming. It's great to have so many questions to choose from for our SEND Searchlights. So let's get started. As mentioned in February's SEND Searchlight, we're going to discuss the role of screeners in relation to diagnostics and diagnosing. We've had several questions relating to this, so thank you to Blajika, hope I've said that right, at SENCO in Norway, Ruth, an assistant head teacher in SENCO in the UK. We've got Matthew, Director of Student Development in Vietnam, and Ashish, a principal in India. So thank you for your contributions. So I'm going to pick on Emma for her wisdom to guide us through this topic.
Thank you, Polly, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, as Polly has said, wherever you are in the world. So I think it's probably helpful if we just start with that word diagnosis, which of course is typically a medical term, isn't it? But when it's used in the world of special educational needs, the word diagnosis has those strong links to what we'd know is a medical model, which focuses on the person having difficulties, whether that's a young person, a child in your setting, or whether that's an adult, rather than what we would refer to as the social model, which examines how we collectively can work on removing barriers, things like the physical, environmental and social barriers for that particular person. So any formal diagnosis or identification of need, which is the terminology I typically use, must be facilitated by somebody who's suitably qualified. So people like educational, clinical psychologists, perhaps speech language or occupational therapists, specialist assessors for specific learning difficulties. And of course, we're very mindful that might look a little bit different wherever you are in the world, depending upon your context. Any screeners, whether they're provided by GL Assessment or GL Education, depending on where you are in the world, or another company, are not designed to provide a diagnosis. So what do we mean if we then use the terminology of diagnostics? So if we're thinking about using assessment data diagnostically, we're talking about how those screeners can provide sort of a set of pre-assessment information to evaluate an individual learner's specific abilities, knowledge and skills in order to address those in a targeted way. So that might be the point at which they join you in school. So perhaps when you are, if you have a process of admissions, you may use some screener assessments there. It may be that as they move through school, they begin to experience some barriers that might be limiting their success, and therefore you want to better understand what those barriers are and how you can remove them. So the information that you gather from your screener assessments can therefore be used to inform adaptations to curriculum, universal design for learning, some people might call that, the implementation of evidence-based interventions, or it might also help you to prioritise and determine next steps where specialist assessment requirement is needed for a particular learner. So just mentioning our screeners for a moment, or our cohort assessment data, which we use as a broad term when we're thinking about things like CAT4 or NGRT or progress tests and PASS. Using either of those two sets of assessments can help to start to build that detailed picture of individual strengths and challenges. But of course, quantitative data from a standardized assessment is only one part of a much bigger puzzle, isn't it? And we all know the essential role of kind of contextualizing the data that you have to support what we would often refer to, Polly and I, as a professional hypothesis of need. What do I know about the learner? What bits do I need to unpack? And there are some kind of key questions, I guess, that we would suggest you sort of ask yourself if you are thinking about using a screener diagnostically. So what led you to carry out that screener? What do you know about the learner now? What context do you have when you start to talk, perhaps even to the learner themselves, where it's age appropriate to do so, but also to other key stakeholders, especially their parents or carers, to understand what's going on for them and the experiences they may be finding challenging and where those barriers might be, and what other evidence do you therefore have to support that professional hypothesis of need? You might have gathered assessment data over time, you might be triangulating that and looking at it diagnostically to try and understand those individual strengths and challenges. Excuse me. We would always say that a balanced profile of assessment and contextual evidence data should help then to determine the most appropriate point of referral to any external assessor for a more specialist assessment that may lead to a diagnosis or a formal identification of need. So just to clarify that in one sentence, a diagnosis is a formal process that requires specialist qualifications of external practitioners typically. Diagnostic use of assessment is a process by which you interrogate your data to understand the individual strengths and challenges. So any of the assessments that we provide will not provide a diagnosis, but they can be used diagnostically to help you to understand those individual strengths and challenges. So we hope that that provides a bit of clarification around the questions that have come in pertaining to that theme. So Polly, I think you've got the next question from Lena.
I do, thank you, Emma. So yes, as Emma said, I've got a question from Lena, who is a learning support teacher in Oman, who's asked a really interesting question around the impact of spatial ability on classroom learning. And when we talk about spatial ability, this is something that can be measured using our cognitive abilities test, or CAT4. Now, spatial thinkers often turn out to be really good at those STEM subjects, so science, technology, engineering, and maths. So coding, game creation, and design. But unfortunately, these talents are often unseen. So most assessments don't actually include any spatial measures. And the high verbal bias of much of the curriculum only serves to mask much of this hidden potential. So students with a spatial bias tend to be quite unconfident vocally as they are with the written word, which means they might struggle to make an impression in class or contribute to class discussions. And while they are intuitive and capable of seeing that bigger picture, it can often be at the expense of attention to detail. So you might see that they do really well in subjects such as science, technology, and design, but would find those more language-heavy subjects like English literature and history more challenging, and even biology and maths too, where there's a high use of written language. So if you have got those learners with those spatial biases and those spatial strengths, these are some key considerations that you might like to think about. So in the classroom, set challenges that involve active learning methods, such as simulations, problem-solving tasks, creation of original ideas, particularly those involving imagery. Think about, does the student prefer an alternative method to recording their learning? Are they more of a visual recorder? Do they use mind maps, diagrams, pictures, 3D images? And then consider interventions that might target those relative challenges with verbal reasoning. How can you support them? Maybe pair them up with those students that have a stronger verbal skill, and you use those two strengths together. And then looking a little bit further down the line, thinking about, is there any evidence to suggest that actually that further targeted screening for specific strengths and challenges necessary? So looking further ahead. Whilst we are on the spatial bias in CAT4, I would like to share some very exciting news. So very soon we will be launching our CAT4 Learner Guide. So understanding an individual's CAT4 profile can help you better define a learner's strengths and challenges, which you can then use to personalise that teaching and learning. Now, within this new learner guide, you can explore examples of different Cat 4 learner profiles and understand more about them. So, for example, one of our friends in the learner guide is Spatial Samira, where there is a whole host of information and guidance on a spatial profile, different strategies that you might like to implement in your classroom teaching, as well as blogs and case studies. So do look out for more information on our Cat 4 Learner Guide, which is coming to you soon. Now I'm going to go back to Emma now for our final question about access arrangements and exams.
Thank you. Well, we've actually been a little bit cheeky here, and we're going to take two questions and combine them because they were sort of broadly connected. And the first question came from Farida, who's a head of inclusion in the UAE, and she was asking about supporting learners with additional needs and exams. And the second was also from the Middle East, from a colleague called Diana, who's the head of support services in Saudi Arabia. And that question was regarding the access arrangements or accommodations that can be made to support administration of GL assessments with learners who have dyslexia. Now, we did touch upon this broadly, the question that Diana has shared in our last episode. So hopefully Diana's listening again today. I would direct you back to that episode for a bit more detail. But in short, our assessments are not considered high stakes, and therefore it's at the discretion for colleagues in schools to make the decisions that are right for the learners in their setting, and to take the appropriate steps to make adaptations that can allow those learners the greater level of accessibility to those assessments. There is, within our SEND training section of our support site, some guidance as to the steps you can take, including a downloadable one-pager with QR codes that give you further reading specific to each of our core assessments or cohort assessments, as I mentioned before. What we should say, though, and this is really important, however, that any adjustments that you make to support those learners with increased accessibility to those assessments, if that's outside of the way that the assessment was originally conducted, the circumstances for the original standardization, that would mean that you would need to be considering the results in that context. And obviously, when we did that standardization, we weren't looking at those adaptations, and there is a possibility that giving those adaptations to a learner may adjust the level of success that they are having, and therefore that standard score should be considered within that context. So it's just important to frame it in that way. So hopefully that's given Diana the information that you need, and I'll mention where you can find that in just a little while in terms of that SEND training. But just returning to the question from Farida regarding the evidence to support adjustments for formal examinations. In this instance, we would always say that your first port of call for any information pertaining to exams is the awarding bodies relevant to your context, because the requirements for different awarding bodies may vary setting to setting, region to region. So please do make them your first port of call. But that said, for those of you who might be supporting students with qualifications that are represented by the Joint Council for Qualifications, or the JCQ in the UK, then we do have some resources that can help. So the standard age score, or the SAS as we often refer to it, and we do have some data spotlight videos that you can have a look at if you need a bit more information around that, also within our training space. The SAS can be used to support your Form 8 applications, and very often colleagues have heard of one of our assessments called Exact, and they often use the data from that assessment for their Form 8 applications. But actually, Exact's not the only assessment of ours that can be used as evidence to support that Part 2 in your Form 8. We also have alternatives, the NGRT and the Cat 4, and Polly's already mentioned something to do with the Cat 4 today. Data from that assessment can be used as part of your evidence. The York Assessment for Reading Comprehension, or YARC, can also be used. BPVS can also be used, and so can the dyslexia portfolio. So if you've got those anywhere within your setting and you're looking for that type of evidence to support your application, then please pull those reports out if you've got them to hand. Now, we do provide some guidance support, some more information as to how those data points can be used, and that includes a really helpful annotated JCQ Form 8 that provides a breakdown of each of those assessments and how they can support that exam access arrangement. So do have a look out for those, because they will be enormously helpful to you if you haven't seen them before. But just circling back again as a reminder that any specific information pertaining to an application for any learner should always be sought from the awarding body, just to make sure that everything is as accurate as it needs to be, because we appreciate just how important those applications are for your learners. So Polly, I'm going to hand back to you to wrap us up.
Thank you, Emma. We've had some great questions today, and once again, thank you for your contributions. Some really good questions to delve deep in and discuss, so I hope you found it useful. Now moving on to our illuminations, where each month following our round of questions, we provide suggestions on some next steps that might be helpful to you on your journey of maximising your support offer to your students. So today we offer that in a form of a now, next and then. So for a now, for those students who are of interest to you or perhaps puzzling you, it might be helpful to consider their overall learner profile. And you can do this by looking at the GL data dashboard, as you can see on the screen now. So on the GL data dashboard, which can be accessed via the TestWise account, you can select individual learners and look at their GL assessments all in one place, as you can see in this example. Then next, from the data dashboard, and using this alongside your contextual knowledge, you might now have a better picture of the barriers to learning the learner might be facing. So you then might want to access our SEND guide, which is available from our support site, and you can use filters and simple filters to guide you to the most appropriate screeners. Then, if you have identified a suitable screener, do head to our training and assessment and insight support page again, where in a different area you can explore the assessments in more detail. So we did have one question come through asking if we had sample reports available. And if you look at the many training videos, it guides you through the reports. So you might find this helpful when trying to make a decision on which one to use. But do explore our support page, where we do have sample reports and those training videos. So that's it from me this month. Thank you for joining, and back to Emma.
Thank you. Oh, excuse me. Thank you, Polly. Some hopeful illuminations that we hope will give you some actions to take away from today's session. As Polly said, we're always trying to give you as much information as we can to help you on that journey. And you're never more than 3 clicks away from those SEND training videos. So if you're on our website, which is either going to be glassessment.co.uk or gleducation.com, you can click in the top right-hand corner on the training and support button. Once you've clicked there, you can go to Training and Assessment Insights, and from there you'll see on the left-hand side a SEND option, and anything that is SEND related is going to be there to help you, including the SEND guide that Polly referenced. So we've already been inspired over 2 sessions by such a vast array of and variety of questions, and we're hoping that we can continue to spot some of those common themes to address over time, including, we think perhaps for next time, something around supporting periods of transition, which seems to be coming up as a common thing. So if you've got any specific questions about that, do raise them. Do keep those questions coming, as Polly has said, and if you could spare us just a few minutes, Polly's going to put on screen a QR code here. This will give you the opportunity to share your reflections on the couple of sessions that you've joined us for, or the one session you've joined us for, and to help us shape future sessions, because we want to make sure that these are meeting your needs. So please do grab your device just now and have a scan of that. We'll also send a link to the survey, so if you don't have your phone to hand, don't panic. If you're wanting to offer that feedback, you'll be able to do that following the session, where we'll share the recording and the link here and the opportunity to register for our future sessions. So if you have found today's session helpful and you think that we could help you a little bit more again next time, then do join us as we meet on Tuesday the 16th of April for our next SEND Searchlight session. But for now, we'll wish you all a great rest of the day, however much of it is left, and thank you ever so much again for joining us.